So Pierce Brosnan makes his second outing as James Bond 007, in a film that's gotten a bit of a soft reputation based on potentially rushed production schedule. So let's see how the truth sorts itself out. But tomorrow never dies. British Special Agent James Bond 007 is sent to the Russian border to recon a terrorist arms bazaar. However, when the Royal Navy greenlights a missile strike on the location, Bond must race to take off with a fighter jet armed with nuclear torpedoes to avoid a catastrophe. However, techno-terrorist Henry Gupta picks up an American satellite encoder, which can be used to manipulate the GPS of military vessels. This allows global media mogul Elliot Carver to orchestrate an incident between the British Navy and Chinese military in the South China Sea by throwing the HMS Devonshire off course, encroaching on Chinese waters. Using an advanced stealth boat, his man Stamper breaches their hull, sinking their ship, and then proceeds to murder the survivors, framing the Chinese for it. The politically charged altercation motivates the British Navy to want to take bold, decisive action, but M convinces the powers that be to give MI6 the time to investigate. She reveals to 007 that a signal was detected from one of Elliot Carver's satellites during the incident. Thus, Bond is sent to Hamburg to Carver's gala event, which will mark the launch of his new global news network, where he plans to broadcast the footage of the sailors' murders. There, Bond encounters an old flame in Paris Carver, the wife of the media baron, who is not so welcoming to James, but manages to heighten Elliot's suspicions, as Bond attempts to masquerade as a banker. As Carver delivers his keynote speech, Bond takes out a group of toughs meant to work him over, then cuts the power to the broadcast, causing a high-profile embarrassment for Carver. As Paris slips off for a sizzling encounter in Bond's hotel room, Gupta deciphers that Bond is a government agent due to his all-too-squeaky clean record as a banker, and uncovers further damning evidence of Bond and Paris' illicit history. While Bond is able to slip into Carver's plant the next day and retrieve the encoder, he discovers that Wei Ling, who passed herself off as a journalist, appears to be a spy as well. Sadly, James discovers that Elliot had Paris murdered for betraying him, and attempts to have Bond killed as well. However, a harrowing invasion of gun-toting henchmen utilizing Q's remote-controlled BMW allows 007 to escape. He soon regroups with CIA agent Jack Wade in the US military to verify his find and locate the HMS Devonshire. It is underwater where Bond and Wei Ling reunite and are eventually captured by Carver and Stamper in the South China Sea near Saigon. There, Carver reveals he plans to launch stolen British torpedoes on the Chinese Navy, thus launching the two into a new world war that will benefit his media empire only. Bond and Wei Ling are ultimately joined at the wrist, forced to make a daring escape down Carver's skyscraper, take off on a motorcycle to elude a helicopter of machine gun-toting bad guys, and face a team of Chinese military personnel attempting to take down Wei Ling. Together, the British and Chinese agents forge a plan to infiltrate and shut down Carver's destructive stealth boat before he launches an all-out war between their respective governments. So the 18th official James Bond film from Yeoh Productions, Tomorrow Never Dies, saw its theatrical release in December of 1997, first on the 12th of the month in the United Kingdom, then 1 week later in the United States on the 19th, and it really was a major effort getting this film up to production because after the major box office success of GoldenEye being $356 million gross, producers really want to get back up on that 2-year production cycle, get one out every other year. And fortunately, there's a lot of things that happened in between the two different films, between GoldenEye and Tomorrow Never Dies. One of them being the passing of producer Albert R. Cubby Broccoli, who was the major producer behind the entire franchise since the very beginning, making this the very first film in the franchise he would not be involved in. And MGM would end up getting purchased by millionaire Kirk Kerkorian, who wanted to take the entire company public. So wanted a big major box office success to follow up the major stock offering in 1987. So they're really kind of clamoring to hash out an idea to throw together in this type of thing, getting a whole bunch of screen artists involved in the entire thing to kind of make something put together. And even though Tomorrow Never Dies cost $110 million to produce against GoldenEye's $60 million, the film still managed to triple its budget at the box office, maintaining a very strong showing for Pierce Brosnan's Bond. And one of the major ideas that are kind of batting around at the forefront here was the fact that in 1987, Hong Kong was going to pass off from the British back to the Chinese, and they're trying to wrap a story all around that. They got pretty far along developing that, but they got some suggestions here and there from people that's like, maybe you don't want to be too topical and that whole thing too time sensitive on that regard, because they're going to be in production right in the time when that handoff is going to happen, so you really can't predict exactly what the political landscape is going to be at the time that's going to happen, stuff like that. So they kind of shoved it off to the side and figured like, well, let's go with something completely different, find something else to go on. And like I said, they brought in a whole bunch of different screenwriters to work on different drafts of the story they wanted to go with, such as author Donald E. Westlake, who did all the Parker novels that stuff like Payback was based off of. They worked with Daniel Petrie Jr., who done Beverly Hills Cop and Toy Soldiers. He worked on a draft. Nicholas Meyer, who did Star Trek II and Star Trek VI. They worked with him on doing some polishes here and there. That they ended up with just one sole screenwriter getting credit in terms of Bruce Fierstein, who didn't have a whole lot involved with his entire thing, but he did work on GoldenEye. He worked on The World Is Not Enough, so they kind of have him kind of in their back pocket in that regard. So they're just throwing a lot of people at this entire thing. And in a way, you think with like that many cooks in the kitchen, stuff like that, you think the entire thing would be kind of a mess. And on a screenplay level, the film is not a mess, but it is kind of restricted to a certain degree in terms of the depth of the characters, the depth of the story in a certain way. Kind of comes off as it's a very kind of like meat and potatoes type of Bond film. There's not a lot, ton of substance to it, but you do have a lot of good moving things in the entire plot here that keeps going on a momentum here. And a lot of that, I think, is kind of to the benefit of director Roger Spottiswoode, who did a lot of different things over his career, including starting out with Terror Train, the Jamie Lee Curtis slasher film. Worked with Daniel Petrie Jr. on Tuner and Hooch, did the unfortunate Stallone comedy, Stop or My Mom Will Shoot, and the kind of middle-of-the-road sort of Schwarzenegger film after this, The Sixth Day, but pretty decent director in that regard. And they kind of courted to get Martin Campbell back, but he was not all that interested in doing yet another Bond film that close after. Went off to do The Mask of Zorro, so that was very much a win for him. And so you got all these people involved in this whole thing, trying to craft a story, and really is a weird type of thing getting up to looking at the production dates of the entire film, because they started second unit photography at the beginning of January of 97, but didn't start with the main unit until April. So they're shooting all the like action sequences and special effects sequences about 3 months before the main cast really kind of starts up in the whole thing. So it's a weird type of thing in that regard, that you'd start that much earlier before anyone else really starts up with the entire film. They probably haven't even cast a lot of people in the entire film by the time they start shooting. And the fact is, they actually didn't have a full screenplay draft done when they start up with the main cast. So you can see, like, well, you really wouldn't want to do a film in that regard, that type of way. And the fact that they didn't have as much things nailed down by the time they start shooting everything in the film really is the kind of rickety type of thing to go off of to kind of start going into the entire production here. So you can kind of see, like, yeah, the fact that you just kind of you have to get kind of just a base script, a story that's easy to put together and follow, that type of thing. You don't have to get too complicated about the whole thing. You just have to make something kind of easy to get into and get out of in that regard. But in terms of transition over from GoldenEye into this film, I think Spottiswoode does a pretty good job in that regard. It's like he still makes a film with sharp action, some smart wit, and some other things that look very, very good in this whole thing. It's like the cinematography in this film just looks really, really damn good. Helmed by Oscar-winning cinematographer Robert Elswith, who started out pretty small, working on Return of the Living Dead 2, then goes up to like Hand That Rocks the Cradle, and then by the end of the 90s, he's working with Joel Schumacher, David Mamet, Paul Thomas Anderson, George Clooney, Ben Affleck, shoots Mission Impossible, Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation. He's working with all these different major players in the entire game, ends up winning Oscars and stuff like that. Phenomenal cinematographer, really does a fantastic job just making this film look really slick. Really good type of things, like everything on the film, photography-wise, looks fantastic. Even though there's a lot of action sequences handled by the second unit that he's not directly involved in, but they're still working off of his style. What he's dictating towards this look and feel of the film does a really wonderful job just making this film look absolutely fantastic in that regard. And let's talk about Pierce Brosnan as James Bond here, and he feels very comfortable in the role right now. It's like he's just so much at ease, moving into all the different facets they have here, and like the story's playing a little lighter than GoldenEye, just a little bit, because it's not quite as emotionally, personally investing as the story was in that film. He can play a little lighter here and there and kind of work more with the charm, more with the humor, stuff like that. Really kind of adding that more into the entire film, but I like that. I think Brosnan in every single film, even though there's problems with the other two, the later two are much more problematic. I think he always was very conscious of making sure he was trying to add more depth into his Bond. When you have the entire scene where he goes back in the hotel room and Paris Carver's been murdered, and you got fantastic Vincent Schiavelli there coming in as Dr. Kaufman, it's such an interesting scene. There's like, Schiavelli was a fantastic talent, and it's like, I feel like if the scene went on too long, or if there was someone with a bit of a lesser talent, the scene would have gotten too comedic. Would have gotten a little too sticky, but I think he's such a really good talent to add a little flavor in the entire thing without pushing it too far away. But you see in the entire scene, just Brosnan's adding that gravitas to the character here, especially when he turns the tables on Kaufman. He's got the gun right up against. It's like, that's as hard edge as Bond ever got. And he does a fantastic job leaning into that when the moment calls for it, and having the little sense of, a little bit of a requiem or whatnot for it, just this little sense of emotional weight to the entire moment there, kind of saying goodbye to her and kind of mourning her loss and stuff like that. So Brosnan was always trying to add those points in there, really kind of make sure that those had a resonance in the entire film, and in his performance, was very much wanting to lean more into that. As the films got a little lighter, a little bit sillier and stuff like that, he still wanted to make sure he had that anchor towards his performance and kind of get that entire thing. So I think he really does a great job in this whole thing. Just, he's got chemistry with everyone in the entire film. Does a wonderful job in that regard. It's like he just puts in a really strong, slick performance here that really kind of adds more into the film than the film is really kind of calling him out to do in such a way. It's like, it's not as much of a, again, emotionally demanding story here for him to go through, but he adds those things in there and makes sure he's very much a reliable actor going in the entire role, and still maintains its stability and consistency from what he did in GoldenEye up into this film. And then just moving over to, again, Dame Judi Dench reprising her role of M, and like, it doesn't quite get as much of her into the film. She's just kind of there almost utilitarian in a certain way to kind of like make certain plot elements move towards certain things, where she's dealing with the Admiral and such here and there with the bureaucrats. So it's like she's not highlighted as much as she is in other films, but she does a very good job here. Just fantastic, magnificent stuff she gets with the way these character is written. Great lines in some places. She's got these wonderful retorts. She's great. Absolutely fantastic. And Samantha Bond doing another great job as Moneypenny. And got a little addition here with Colin Salmon here playing Deputy Chief Robinson. Like, I really like Colin Salmon. He's a really solid, excellent actor. Goes on to do a lot of good work, and just like always a highlight whenever I see him in something. He's just such a great actor, great presence, great charisma on screen, great addition overall. Just like got a really good other great additions, like really fantastic things. Of course, you get Teri Hatcher in this whole thing. She's pretty fresh off of playing Lois Lane in The New Adventures of Superman on TV. And she was actually 3 months pregnant going into shooting her scenes on the whole thing, which inadvertently caused a little friction when she was kind of late to the set and whatnot one day, and Pierce Brosnan was a little cross with her, but once he found out that she was pregnant and it was probably something involving that, he very much formally apologized, stuff like that. And so I think she does a really excellent job in such a way that she creates a very kind of spicy foil for Bond right at the beginning of the film. They just have a certain sensibility, they have some sizzle between one another. They really have a chemistry that sparks off in really good ways in the whole film. With kind of an empathetic conflict. She's kind of like, she's married to Elliot Carver and the whole thing, and she's got this history with Bond that wasn't turning out so well, but she kind of twists things around a little bit here and there and kind of gets lured away and kind of goes off with Bond and has the encounter in the hotel room, stuff like that, and of course ends tragically and stuff like that. So it's kind of a nice thing that really could have been sparked off a lot stronger in terms of like the motivation for Bond, even though you got the Wei Ling character portrayed by Michelle Yeoh kind of asking him later on if it's more kind of like a personal thing or is much more down to business or whatnot. I feel like they could have added that angle more fully into the character or whatnot, into the story. They have a little bit more of a heightened emotion regarding that and involving Bond and Elliot Carver in that regard. But I think Hatcher does a very good job in the whole thing. She does add something extra to the art film just on her presence alone, because she was such a very hot property on TV at the time. But just another fantastic gift for the entire film was Michelle Yeoh, and just like, you gotta revere her as a film legend. Even up to this point in time right now, doing stuff like Everything Everywhere All at Once and the Star Trek stuff and all the stuff she was doing back then, Hong Kong cinema and all the type of things, like, she's so magnificently well talented and so versatile in what she can bring to the screen. Then you're talking about just the action stuff, where it's like, she wasn't quite as used to like the Western style of making action films, so she was a little stiffer on stuff. So they actually apparently, supposedly, brought in Jackie Chan's stunt team to kind of work with her in that entire like martial arts sequence she has, which is actually fantastic. She's just shines so much all over the place in the entire film, and she's got great chemistry with Pierce Brosnan. It's like she feels so much on an equal level with him. So much. It's like you can feel the rapport, the chemistry, all the type of stuff. They're shining off on each other, whatnot. She's great with the wit and the humor, all the type of things. Like there's so much in line and so in sync with the entire film. I think she does a fantastic job in the entire film, just like getting a appeal from a different market and that type of thing, so you could sell the film much more towards that Asian market. I have a star that's recognizable to him, all these type of things. She just did so much good in the entire film. I think she's just so much of a great character in such a way that she's clever, resourceful, she's intelligent, she can work off of everything so much independently, but it's such a great role, and she does a fantastic job with the entire thing. Well, someone else who does a really excellent job, just like Jonathan Pryce. Wonderful talent, just like I love so much. The guy can do some very sophisticated type of stuff, but man, he loves to chew up the scenery whenever he gets a villain role. Anything good, anything, even his comedy stuff, like the Pirates of the Caribbean stuff, but when you see him when he's in those G.I. Joe films, stuff like that, when he's playing this guy's version of Zartan, the guy will chew up on action villain role in such a way, it's like he's having the time of his life, and he really is enjoying the hell out of himself as Elliot Carver here. I love him so much. Like they give him a really full character to work off of on screen. It's like he's got so many great kind of megalomaniacal type of things going off the whole thing. He's just having a fun time with it. And I love so much what he brings to the role. It's like he's got great dialogue. He's got great rapport with Pierce Brosnan and everything else. It's like he's doing great things. Great things. I think he's, even though he's not having as much substance as maybe like some more higher ranked type of Bond villains, I think and just performance-wise, I think he deserves some recognition on that front, that he brings something that's maybe not as much on the page, but it brings so much life to it to make him so very entertaining and memorable. He does a great job in that regard. And like, you got a little smaller players. You got Joe Don Baker coming back as Jack Wade. I like, again, another guy's like, why didn't you bring him back more? He was fantastic in this role and added so much dynamic with Pierce Brosnan and with his James Bond, Jimbo. It's like he's great in the whole thing. And he's only there for a little bit of time when they're at Army base and they're doing the Halo jump, stuff like that. But like, such a great talent, having a good thing in that regard. And getting in Ricky Jay, who I think was a regular collaborator with David Mamet, and having him in the entire film as Gupta, the kind of tech guy in the whole thing, is like he does a really good job, all the type of things. And getting Göetz Otto as Stamper here is like, another guy's like, he's got a good presence, he's got a good charisma on screen, he's got a good look on that type of thing, but they didn't really write much of a character for him to do anything. It's just written as random thug, random henchman type of guy, but I feel like he could have done a whole lot more with it based on where they were trying to go with the climax of the film, kind of have a major punch-up between him and Bond and the whole thing going on in that regard. Feels like there was kind of a missed opportunity to do something more with that character. It's like if they had more time to really flesh out the script and do a little more eccentricities with certain characters, stuff like that, I think that a lot of things would have shined a little bit further and been a little bit more memorable on those smaller roles here and there and whatnot. But Desmond Llewellyn does a fantastic, charming job again as Q and stuff like that. So they really have a lot of the actors come in and elevate the material. They really bring their A game so much to make them entertaining, charismatic, and all these different things. So you can make it a very easy ride to go through the entire film. It's like if there's some people who weren't as invested, or they're kind of laid back in the entire thing and really kind of leaning into it as much as they are, really make a little less of a film overall. But I think all the actors really do add so much to the film to really give it a little bit more punch than the screenplay really is giving them. And stepping into scoring duties on this film was David Arnold, who would end up working on all the subsequent Bond films up through Quantum of Solace, really debuting here in such a great way. Just like, he maintains the classic Bond sound, moving away from the weird electronic stuff Eric Serra was doing on GoldenEye that they had to kind of fudge around with and kind of replace some tracks here and there in the film. But he really just adds it so much with a contemporary modern flair to it. It's like he adds in some electronic things here and there to kind of amplify things in such a way when you're doing the action sequences, getting a little more percussive, stuff like that. But he does such a great job overall. Like, I really like the cue at the end of the film when, like, after the stealth boat is blown up and stuff like that, it has a really wonderful, warm cue in such a way. Such great stuff in that regard. And previous Bond composer John Barry was kind of in talks here or there about maybe coming back, but they really couldn't nail down details on terms of salary and stuff like that, where he would be very much happy going back into it. And it has some very kind of interesting things in terms of like getting the main songs involved in the entire film, where so like having the main composer kind of work with a certain talent and kind of court them and kind of work in collaboration with it. They really kind of like just like had like a call out to like people just send us songs and whatnot, and we'll kind of have that as your audition, trying to figure out who has the best song for us to kind of go with. And end up with Sheryl Crow, which was kind of a chart topper of some sort at the point in time, but a lot of people have been kind of like okay about the entire song she does for the entire film here, going off with a really fantastic opening credit sequence. Like, I think it did a really good job designing that whole thing, but it doesn't quite hit me as well. It's just like one of those songs, like, she's kind of a singer-songwriter, but she's not really known as like a very strong voice in that regard. It's very much kind of like this kind of laid-back sort of Southern California kind of feel in such a way. It's like, it's an okay, fine track, but it doesn't really hit me. What does hit me is the Katie Lang song Surrender that goes over the end credits, which David Arnold did work on and does incorporate into his entire score here. Fantastic track, just like it evokes so much that Shirley Bassey sort of sensibility, but it's got that great kind of crooner sensibility that she brings the entire thing. It's big, it's epic, it's such a sultry sort of sound in such a way. It's like, it's a wonderful track. Really, really good type of things, and thankfully, really kind of good type of things. Like La La Land Records, just a few months ago, did release an expanded and remastered complete version of the soundtrack with all of David Arnold's cues, plus both the Sheryl Crow and the Katie Lang songs. Really want to grab this. If you really much like Arnold stuff, if you're a big fan of it, grab this thing, because it is a limited edition 2-disc set, a whole bunch of liner notes and stuff like that. Really looks like a damn good one to grab hold of. Grab it if you haven't. Grab it now. But all the other good stuff in this film comes along with the action sequences and the special effects. A lot of the visual effects are done with much more the underwater sequences, where they had a model of the subboat that got sunk, and they're using like green screen composites to put in the live action divers, stuff like that in the whole thing. Really minimal type of things. They do a whole lot, but especially when they get into the entire chase sequence in Saigon, the rotator blades on the helicopter are actually CGI. Because they just moved the thing around on this big hydraulic lift, and they maintained a sense of safety, because they knew with all these close quarters in the city, it'd be very dangerous to have actually live rotator blades going on, so they just removed the hydraulic lift in post and added in the blades and all that type of stuff. So it was like, I'm watching the film, I don't know exactly where the visual effects are in the entire film. There's not a lot of things that kind of stand out so much, but it's like, that's the brilliance of doing like minimal visual effects at the point in time. You can put a lot more time and effort into those things and make them look seamless, when you don't have a multitude of different things. You have to splash across the scene like they get a little bit overboard in Die Another Day, but we won't talk about that. But it's like that entire sequence. That sequence is fantastic. The entire sequence, when they're on the motorbike and all the different things, it's brilliant. Brilliant type of things. Even though there may be a sensibility that maybe the film gets a little indulgent with the action sequences, like they go on maybe longer than they really need to, but they're still spectacular type of things. The stunt work in this thing is absolutely incredible, and the second unit was helmed up by veteran stunt coordinator Vic Armstrong, who's like one of the best in the field. Like, you've seen this guy's work in dozens of action films. Like, he worked on the first 3 Christopher Reeve Superman films, the first 3 Indiana Jones films. He worked on Rambo 3, Conan the Destroyer, Never Say Never Again. He worked on Total Recall, Universal Soldier, Mission Impossible 3, just a ton of films with amazing action sequences, and this guy was directly responsible for making them some of the best stunt spectaculars you've ever seen. So this guy was handling all that type of stuff. He was the guy shooting all that stuff at the beginning of January, before they even started the main production line on the entire film. Just the opening sequence, when Bond's kind of have to get on the plane to get the nuclear missiles away from the entire explosion, stuff like that. Everything looks fantastic. It just has a great energy and propulsion to it. And just get into the entire thing where they have the entire parking garage sequence, like with the remote control cars. Like, it's clever, it's awesome type of stuff, and the whole thing is like, just has that extra level of the gadgetry and stuff like that. People kind of like wanted a little more gadgetry after they did GoldenEye. It's like, maybe a few other extra little knickknacks here and there for Bond to kind of play with and stuff like that. So it's like, again, it's a slightly indulgent sequence in that regard, but it's like, Bond is usually indulgent. The franchise is indulgence to a certain degree, and it's still fantastically well executed. Like, if it's all amazingly well done type of stuff, I'm not going to criticize it as much because they did such a great job adding the work into it that make it look wonderful. So like all the different things you have going on with all the different chase sequences and Bond kind of dodging and weaving between guys with machine guns, stuff like that, it all looks fantastic. Of course, got the entire thing where they're jumping off the Carver building, which again was partially CGI. They married everything together with a stunt being done on a soundstage against green screen with Michelle Yeoh and Pierce Brosnan, and then composite that onto the live action photography of the actual building and make everything look absolutely fantastic. And getting up to the entire action climax here, you got Bond and Wei Ling infiltrating the stealth boat and setting up explosives and kind of weaving things around where Wei Ling gets captured. They have the whole thing with a standoff between Carver holding Wei Ling, and then they have Bond holding off Gupta, and a little bit of betrayal and kind of backstabbing here and there in that regard. Everything goes off with the fantastic explosions, the big set pieces, everything going on with all the gunfire, just fantastic type of stuff. Carver biting it from the entire like boring torpedo thing he's got going on that he's breached the hulls of the ships before. Fantastic type of thing. And then you get whole thing with Stamper, getting the whole thing going up with him holding Wei Ling with the chains on her, and he kind of plunge her down, drowning her underneath the entire boat, and then everything battling on top of the entire torpedo there, the missile, whatnot, between Bond and Stamper. It's like, it's really good, energetic, and really fantastically explosive type of things. Like, it's a really solid, satisfying, entertaining climax that really comes off so well because of all the effects, all the stunt work, all the things going on in the film. They did all the right planning in that regard. If anything else falls off in terms of script, they do fantastically well planned out and choreographed action sequences that really just hit up so much to be so entertaining and satisfying. But again, even if they are long to a certain degree, they don't stop the momentum of the film. They still add things into it and still maintain certain clever qualities about characters and how they deal with the entire thing. I think everything just comes off magnificently well in terms of the stunt and the action and the effects in their film. Nail it so very well. And in terms of like all the underwater stuff and all the things doing with the entire stealth boat and whatnot, they actually ended up using the sound stages and the tanks made for Titanic there, and fortunately they weren't able to go back to Leavesden that they made for GoldenEye with the big Rolls-Royce factory they had there, because that was being used by the Phantom Menace. So they went back to the old 007 stage over at Pinewood and whatnot and used that, and some other things here and there. They kind of used some locations in the UK to kind of double for the like parking garage sequence in Hamburg and stuff like that. So they really kind of went all over the place. They kind of globetrot a little bit here and there, because they were going to end up shooting the entire big Saigon chase sequence over in Vietnam, but they kind of got the rug pulled out from them at a certain point in time, so they ended up back in China shooting that whole thing. But like I said, there's not much substance to the entire story here. There's like very kind of utilitarian type of thing going on the whole film. It's like everything moves forward very much easily and concisely and stuff like that. The action kind of services the plot to the most degree. But I kind of like the entire thing you have, especially looking back on everything right now with all this hindsight, stuff like that. The entire thing of having this character of Elliot Carver manipulating the news and whatnot to kind of create all this conflict and whatnot, kind of controlling the politics of the world through the media. That's very, very topical for us here at this point in time in the last several years or whatnot. So it's like, it rings very strongly. It really does work so very well. Even though I think there's maybe some criticisms of the time, it's like they thought it was a little preposterous or something else like that, where plenty of Bond plots have been preposterous in the past. But it's like, it's one of those things, like, it does work off. Again, Pryce is golden in this whole thing, doing a fantastic work on this entire character here. It's like, it's a nice plot. I think it's a nice kind of shift to a certain degree. But like this, like, Bond can still be Bond in the whole thing, but he's still kind of dealing with this whole like new age of technology and information and whatnot. It's not quite as like futuristic as some other technology is kind of shown in other Bond films, but it's like, it feels kind of here and now type of thing for 97, working on the whole thing where he's got all these satellites going off and they're doing all these different things. Like, again, the whole thing like being able to throw the ships off course, stuff like that, fingle around with the satellite feed, stuff like that. Everything still feels kind of on point or whatnot. It feels kind of not too lofty in that regard, pushing things forward and kind of getting outside the box of reality. It feels very much kind of like relatable to a certain degree. It just feels like a contemporary Bond plot that doesn't go too hard on anything. It doesn't kind of go off too silly to a certain degree. It's kind of almost a nice middle ground to a certain degree. You still have kind of a lighter tone than you had before, but you don't lose quite as much in terms of like Brosnan still bringing certain qualities to the entire character. Still throwing in a few extra quips in there than you had before, but still maintaining a sense of stability and gravity to the character, but still having great dynamics to work off with the entire film. So I think everything kind of works very nicely. It's not the most challenging Bond film or the most heavyweight Bond film or anything like that, but there's plenty of other Bond films that are just really silly and really kind of ridiculous and get off to certain degrees that are just not very good, or they're just like really misfires to a certain degree. This one's nice. I think it kind of gets dismissed too much because you start thinking about World Is Not Enough is a little flat, it's a little bland to a certain degree. Dying Out of the Day is just stupidly ridiculous, even though there's some interesting elements of the plot that just get way overblown with too much cartoonish crap. This one's kind of a nice, again, kind of meat and potatoes Bond film. You can go into it, have a good time with it, have great action sequences, good co-stars, whatnot. Michelle Yeoh doing phenomenal work in the whole film. It's a good, enjoyable time. I really enjoy going back to it. It's like, again, it's not going to push the entire legacy of Bond to any new degrees, but it's a good piece of work. I think people need to kind of go back to it. It's enjoyable, it's entertaining, it's got good things for it. It's not as many flaws as people could kind of shoot through other films. It's good, it's solid, it's all that type of stuff. It's sometimes you don't have to be the absolute best or the most innovative or whatnot. It's just if you're just a good, solid piece of entertainment, it's a good thing to praise. It's a nice thing to have every so often. So guys, I think there's a lot of things to say about it. It's the whole odd thing about how the original title was Tomorrow Never Lies, which feeds into the theme and the plot, all that type of stuff, because the name of Carver's newspaper is Tomorrow. So it was smart, but someone had a typo on a fax to MGM that said Tomorrow Never Dies, and the studio told them to change the title because they liked that one better, so they kind of threw that off to certain degrees. Here, there, and everywhere. But guys, share me what your thoughts are on Tomorrow Never Dies and stuff like that, and how would you rank the Brosnan Bond films in that regard? Because definitely not going to be talking about the other two anytime soon. But guys, love having you here, having you comment, interact, like, subscribe, share stuff around so much. Of course, there's the Patreon if you want to contribute something every month to get a little something back, a little early access, and support things around here, along with the Super Things feature here on YouTube. You can just hit that up and contribute whatever you want to any video that you find exceptionally well entertaining or anything else like that. So guys, thank you so very much. Take care. Bye-bye.